It's very important to know who you can trust. Trusting someone you should trust is the best. Not trusting someone you shouldn't trust is, well, who cares? Not trusting someone you should trust is causing damage to you, to them, and to the organization. But trusting someone you should not trust is, well, right down dangerous and could have devastating consequences. So, how do you decide if you can trust someone or not? This is the first of a 4-episode mini-series. In this series, I will break down the process of determining just that. I'm going to give you a science-based, pragmatic, intentional, and very prescriptive way to tell if you can trust someone, in what, and how much. Because trust is relative. I will use the 8 laws of trust and the 6 components of my relative trust model. I will show you how to determine the level of trust you should have in another person based on who they are and what they do. And if you think that your gut has nothing to do with it, you're wrong. It is, and I'll show you how to train your gut to tell you if you can trust someone or not. There is one more exciting thing that I want to share with you today. I transcribed these episodes and then I condensed them into articles. I've been doing that since the first episode of season 4. I have now released a new book series that has the articles based on this podcast. The first 3 volumes just got published this week and are available in both printed and electronic formats. If you want the audio format, well, then just listen to this podcast. With that, let's start talking about how you can tell if you can and should trust someone right after this. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? Trust is declining. There is no doubt about that. If you go to the Edelman Trust Barometer, you will see just how far it has declined. It declined the trust that we have in the media, in politicians. Those are some of the bottom ones, the trust we have in government. But even the trust that we have in each other has declined, which makes it only more important that we know who to trust. Now, the subtitle of the Book of Trust, is build trust, be trusted, and know who to trust. And for the most part, up until now, my focus on build trust was how every single person builds their own trustworthiness, as well as learning how to trust somebody else. But that's a small part. The big part is know how to be more trusted. What do you have to do? What you can do to be more trusted? And I haven't focused much on, at least in this podcast, on knowing who to trust. How can you tell who you can trust? And the purpose of this series of episodes, it's probably not going to be one. The purpose is to show you who to trust and how you can tell if you can trust someone, or how much you can trust them. So first, I'm going to start with some very high-level issues related to trust. First of all, I want you to remember trust law number 8, and that is that trust is a two-person game. Trust is two-sided. That means that the level of trust that you have in somebody else is the product of your trustfulness and their trustworthiness. So it's not enough for them to be trustworthy for you to trust them. You have to also have a good degree of trustfulness. Now, think about them as being multiplied. And what this means is that one person with low trustfulness would trust another person with high trustworthiness just about the same amount that a person with high trustfulness, and trustfulness is really your willingness to trust other people, in how much they trust someone with high trustfulness, someone with low trustworthiness. So just remember that, because I'll refer to these phrases. The reason that the level of trust is declining is twofold. On one hand, direct trustworthiness is declining. It starts with fraud, cybercrime, people trying to steal your identity. It seems like fraud and stealing and, other crimes. I'm talking about crimes. And when I say crimes, it's things that are punishable by law. They're increasing. And when they're increasing, do you trust people? Doesn't that affect how you see trustworthiness? So trustworthiness is declining, one, because of fraud, two, because of all kinds of marketing and sales tricks that cause you to believe that the value you're getting from a product or service is more than it really is, and that the price that you're actually paying is less than what you really do pay. And I talked about that more in another episode when I talked about the formula that makes companies trusted and their customers loyal. So there are a lot of marketing tricks. Just look at your LinkedIn account or Facebook or your email inbox and see how many people are just trying to sell you on how to get more customers. And it's really, the title should be how to trick more people to be your customers. Because for a big part of it, you're really tricking them. So we got fraud, we got marketing tricks. Those are declining in trustworthiness, declines in trustworthiness. Then there's the polarization that we have in our society that I think it's pretty much equal, maybe even more than what we had before the Civil War in the 19th century. We dehumanize people. So the other people are dehumanized. And would you trust somebody who dehumanizes you? There is a general decline in empathy. There was a study done, I think it was 2017 or 2015, that showed that the level of empathy, or I'll put it the other way around, because the study was really about individualism, and this is how we focus on ourselves and the world revolves around us. And that increased over the last 51 years, actually the 51 years covered in the study. In general, in 78 countries, it increased by 12%, but in English-speaking countries, which we lead, it increased by 60 to 69%. So less empathy, and in general, those are all components that make you trust other people less, but because they're less trustworthy. If they're tricking you, if they use a lot of BS, if they use a lot of fraud, if they don't care about you, if they dehumanize you, they're not empathetic to you, then they're less trustworthy, at least in your eyes. That's the direct impact, but there is an indirect impact, and that's the impact on our trustfulness, our willingness to trust other people. And it's the result of the direct decline in trustworthiness, because when so many people are untrustworthy, you can't trust them, that hurts your trustfulness. You are less inclined to trust people, period. Because you're starting to think that all people are like that. I mean, when you got exposed to so many people who are untrustworthy, should you be trusting the next person? There is an impact. And this is why every time I talk about trustfulness and trustworthiness, I tell people that you are in full control of your trustworthiness, but have almost no impact on trustfulness. And I don't say that you don't have impact. You have almost no impact, because those things are cumulative. The more untrustworthy people you're going to encounter, the less trustfulness you'll have. So what that causes is that if somebody is trustworthy, you're going to trust them less, because trust is the product of not only their trustworthiness, but your trustfulness, which is indirectly declining because of the decline in other people's trustworthiness. So this is why we have a general decline in trust. I'm not going to throw percentages from research done by others. I think the Edelman Trust Barometer is a good source for that. And there are other sources. There is a general decline in trust, which makes it even more important for you to be able to detect whether you can trust another person, whether the other person is trustworthy or not. Wow, that was a mouthful. Then took a third of this episode. But it was important. It was important to understand that decline and why is it declining, and the distinction between trustfulness and trustworthiness. I did, as usual, I typically do a LinkedIn poll just to get the sense of what people care about it, or who do you care about if you could trust? And so I asked this question. I wrote the next episode of the Trust Show podcast. It's actually more than one episode. We'll address, how do you know if you can trust X? And who would you like X to be? And I gave several options in the workplace. I focused on the workplace. My boss got 45%. My peers, people at the same level, my colleagues, 18%. Those are people I don't control and they don't control me. People working for me, 9%. So that's interesting. Well, it's not, I shouldn't say it's interesting, because you'll see something that I found in one of my surveys that would make it consistent. And it's not just interesting, it's also sad. So we really care the most about whether we trust our boss, whether we can trust our boss, followed by my peers, followed by the last place, people working for me. And then you have others, and I asked for comments, but I didn't get any comments, so I don't know who those others are. So the first thing is, again, really this applies to every relationship. What I'm going to teach you in this series of episodes is applying, or it applies to every relationship. This is how you look at somebody and decide whether you can trust them or not, whether you should trust them or not. But, back in 2018, I did a survey and I asked the question, how important is trustworthiness as a quality? Or what's the most important quality for you in another person? And I referred to that survey many times. I think, if I remember correctly, 363 responses to the survey. I collected them, aggregated them, categorized them. And what I found was, first of all, that overall, we put trustworthiness 61.2% as the most important quality, which means it's more than the next qualities, all qualities combined. And I have to admit that I consolidated things. So when somebody said integrity, and I had several main categories, that it really fell with trustworthiness in general. So 61.2% overall. But I asked about 6 types of people. I asked about a salesperson, your spouse, your government representative, your boss, colleague, or peer, and your employees. And so the top one was salesperson. So when we were asked what is the most important quality for me in a salesperson, 77.4% said trustworthiness. So salesperson, when I asked about salespeople, trustworthiness was the most important one, more than in any other relationship. Next was spouse, 77.2%. Spouse was the only one that received 3 responses that the most important quality for 3 people out of 363, or 0.83%, said the most important quality in a spouse is good looks. Don't know if this was being funny or what, but that's why you have a large enough sample. But spouse trustworthiness in a spouse was 77.2%. And I understand, in salespeople, if you think about that, you have one transaction mostly. So it's really important that you know that transaction works well, not to mention that it is a transaction where they give you something of value, and more importantly, you give them something of value, and that's your money. Spouse, That's a long relationship. You want to know that you can trust the person you're going to spend a long relationship with. The next one was government representative, 65.5%. And, I know that some people may think that maybe what this means is that we don't trust the government or we don't trust government representatives, and this is why we rank trustworthiness as important. But no, I asked you about the trustworthiness, and I asked about willingness to work hard and willingness to take risk, and I asked about intelligence. And people just said in my government representative, which apparently is important to us, 65.5% believe that trustworthiness is the most important quality in them. 60% in a boss, which is a little interesting because it's a little less than the overall of 61.2%. 60% said that the most important quality for them in their boss, is trustworthiness. When I asked about a colleague or a peer, this was the first time where the number went below 50%. So less than 50% said that trustworthiness is the most important one. It was still the top one with 49.2%. The second one was with 33.8% was the willingness to work hard. So when I'm asking you about your peer, a colleague, somebody who works with you, what is the most important quality for you in them? In about 50%, 49.2%, you're going to say that it's their trustworthiness. But 33.8%, or a third of the time, it's their willingness to work hard. So you want to see your coworker willing to work hard, which, by the way, plays into one of the components of the 6-component relative trust model, symmetry. You want to know that they're willing to work hard, especially if you're willing to work hard, because you trust someone who is putting in as much effort as you do. So that's why that plays a role. But now comes the interesting part, and I talked about that before, so it shouldn't be too surprising to you. When I asked leaders, bosses, managers about their employees, trustworthiness was 39.3% most important quality. It was actually not even the first place. This was the only one of 6 relationships where it wasn't in the first place. First place, 47.5% was the willingness to work hard. You remember how I told you that in my it was a very small sample LinkedIn poll, when I asked, who do you want to know if you can trust, the lowest number was for people working for me, which is very consistent with my survey that said 39.3% of leaders, managers, bosses thought that trustworthiness is important in their employees, which means that they're not willing to trust their employees. If they don't care about whether they can trust their employees or not, if they don't care about the employees' trustworthiness, this is how these things tie up, then, why would they trust them? And if they don't trust them, they're not going to give them autonomy, and they're not going to give them a lot of things that would cause the employee, in turn, not to trust their boss. It's an interesting cycle there. So trustworthiness is important to us in the other person. And I'm going to deduct from it simply because trust is the product of trustfulness and trustworthiness, that trust is important for us. In this series of episodes, what I'll do is I will explain how we make that decision. But also, what are the type of things that we can do to make a more accurate decision? I'm going to give you a very pragmatic approach, a very prescriptive approach to make that determination rather than my gut. I asked people many times, how do you decide if you can trust somebody else? And the answer was, I trust my gut. And if you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, that talks about kind of trusting your gut and where do you get your gut feeling. One of the warnings in that book is that you can't always trust your gut. You need to know when you can trust your gut and when not to. He offers what are the type of things you can do to improve the predictability or the accuracy of your gut decision. And I'll tell you about an experiment in one of the episodes in this series. But what I'm trying to give you here, what I'm giving you here in this series of episodes and articles that would come out of it is what would be a more prescriptive, predictive, more accurate process for you or steps for you to take to know if you can trust another person. Now comes the question, what do I need to trust another person with and how much? Because trust, and this is one of my first, actually the first law of trust is that trust is continuous. It's not binary. Trust law number 2 is that it's contextual, and I'll talk about these two laws in this segment. You know, there is absolutely no meaning to the question, can I trust this other person, yes or no? There is no meaning for it. There are different levels of trust that we have in people, and there are different contexts. So let's start with the different levels of trusting another person. Robin Dunbar, he's a British anthropologist, and he did a study. Actually, it's a very interesting study of a correlation between the volume, the size, the three-dimensional size of our brain or a specific part of the cortex, to how many people do we have in our social network. And he found that the volume of the neocortex in different species, so he tried that in different species and then observed the size of their social groups. And what he found was that humans can have about 150 of what he calls casual friends in that group. Well, being in that level of relationship with another person suggests a certain level of trust that you can have in that person. But he later, in a later article, he talks about different sizes of groups and different levels of trust or relationships you have with them. And by the way, interestingly enough, it correlates to the size of a military unit, where the smallest unit is a team. Team would typically have something like 5. You would trust them the most. You will spend the most time with them. There are reasons why you trust them the most, but there is a very small group that you would trust more than anybody else. Think about those people in your life. You know, somebody suggested something to me, and hopefully I'm not going to offend anyone. That's not my intention. But if you want to know if somebody belongs to that top group, ask yourself, would you trust them to help you hide a body? Would you trust them to help you hide a body? How many people can you trust to help you hide a body? And obviously, it's more than hide it. It's not saying anything about it. And you'll find that there is a very small group that you have that utmost, highest level of trust in. Then you have a group of 15, which, you know, I don't remember what the American military group sizes are, where we have the platoon, the company, division, battalion, brigade, and so on. Brigade, I think, is like 1,500 people, and but you know, how much do you trust them? How much do you trust the people that you're connected with on LinkedIn or Facebook? I mean, how many friends do you have on Facebook? And I'm using the word friends loosely here. I mean, it's really more of the Facebook friend type definition. How many do you have there? How many of them can you trust that they will help you hide a body? Okay, very, very, very few. And those very, very few are the ones that you have a personal outside of Facebook relationship with. So, you know, you may have a very powerful relationship, very high level of trust in 5 people. And doesn't have to be 5. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 7, but it's probably not more than that. And you have a lower level of trust in the next 15 and even a lower level of trust in the next 50 and the next 150 and so on and so forth. You see where I'm going with that. Now, here's another philosophical thing to think about. There is a limited amount of trust or that you have to spread around. And it really depends to what are the types of things that you have at risk for which you need somebody to trust to help you compensate for that risk. And that's why there is no way. I mean, there are multiple reasons. And actually, the first episode of the first season of this podcast, when I talked about the size of a team and how it correlates with trust, there is a limited level of trust, and you can't have the utmost level of trust in 1,500 people. So it has to be a much smaller group. Also, we need to keep in mind that trustfulness is really correlated to the different entities that we trust, because we trust ourselves, we trust God, we trust other people, we trust other things. And when I talk about other things, it's really people that we don't know through proxy of a thing. And so let's take an airplane. You're about to board an airplane, and in your mind, you're asking, do I trust this airplane? But the airplane is really the proxy for the people who built it, designed it, maintained it, and fly it. Although the pilot you can see, but your trust in that thing is really a proxy for trust in people you don't know. And again, if we have a limited amount of trust to spread around, if you trust yourself a lot, it will typically come at the expense of trusting other people, or even trusting God, or trusting things. If you trust God with everything, and I'll again tell you that story of this guy. It's a folk story of this guy who's there was a flood, and he went up to the roof of his house, and then the news, actually, before the flood came too high, it was heard on the news that there is a flood and people needed to leave. But he decided, I trust God. I'm not going to leave. God will take care of me. God would not let me drown. And so he stayed. Then a neighbor came by with a boat and said, hey, the waters are rising. You can't walk anymore. So hop on my boat and I'll take you to safety. And this very religious, very God-trusting person said, no, I'm not leaving. I'm staying here. I believe in God. I trust God. God will take care of me. God would not let me drown. So he stayed. Then the fire department came over with a helicopter, and they dropped a rope ladder, and they said, climb up that ladder and we'll take you to safety. And he said, no, I'm staying here. I trust God. I believe in God. God will not let me drown. I'm staying here. Waters kept rising and he drowned. And as soon as he got to heaven, he first demanded an audience with God. And when God saw him, he said, God, I trusted you. I believed in you. How did you let me drown? And God said, well, I sent you a newspaper. I sent you a neighbor with a boat. I sent you a helicopter. What else do you want from me? So again, we trust things. And in this folk story, that person trusted God to the point that it came at the expense of trusting other people and other things, and even himself. So I do believe that there is a limited level of trust. I'm getting a little too philosophical here, but I do believe that level of trust is limited. And it really depends on the risks that we're taking in life, or risks that we're exposed to, or the rewards that we want to get that typically don't come without risk. And we split them. That's a personal decision, how we split that trust, or where we are seeking that trust between ourselves, God, other people, and other things. And the trustfulness component of trust, the trust formula, is really the trust that we have in other people. Well, we can apply to the trust in ourselves, but, it's limited to, how can I say, trustfulness is my willingness to trust people who are me. I mean, there's only one person. So trustfulness, I'll look at trustfulness as my willingness to trust other people. And the next thing that I want you to think about is what do we need to trust? What do you need to trust another person with, and how much? So once again, it's the first two laws of trust. Well, it starts with what's the reward? You heard that, no risk, no reward. So typically, if you want a reward, it comes with a risk attached. I mean, if you want to get more than what you currently are getting, there's some risk associated with it, because otherwise you will go and get it anyway. You're not there. It's not a question. If you can get a higher reward and risk nothing, then why not? So there is a reward and there's a risk associated with it. Now, there is a risk tolerance bar that we each have. And that's how much risk we're willing to take. And, if that risk materializes, that's okay. We're okay with that. The thing is that when we start looking for a bigger reward and have a bigger risk, that risk goes below our risk tolerance, or depends on how you look at it, but our risk tolerance bar. So it's a little too risky than we're willing to tolerate in general. And we need to trust another person to take us back to our comfort zone, to above our risk tolerance, to, now I feel safe enough. So the level of trust that I need in another person it depends on how far am I from my risk tolerance for seeking a certain action that has a reward. So, I'm about to start a startup company. Hypothetically, I'm not starting another startup company. I've started enough in my life. So I'm about to start a startup company. And the reward is, different people will see different rewards, but it can be the upside of once we go public or once we get acquired, and I'm going to own 30% of the equity in this company, and we're going to be acquired for $100 billion. No, let's just make it $100 million. Then I'm going to be making $30 million. There's a reward here, but it comes with a risk. And the risk is that it's going to go nowhere. That I'm going to be wasting my next 5 years in something that's not even going to pay me a salary, at least not initially. So that's a risk, and that risk may go below my risk tolerance bar. Now, some of us have more money set aside, some of us don't. So if for me, for the next 5 years, my current business, it was a risk that I took. I wanted the reward, and the reward was, getting to speak to all those companies and organizations, and the compensation that comes with it, and the fame. You know what? That was one of my rewards, being known for somebody who really knows trust. But the risk, to me, was below my trust, my risk tolerance bar. And when I say below, it means that I was taking more risk than I wanted to take. So I needed to trust. Who do I needed to trust? But again, the level of trust that I needed was just to get me to that risk tolerance level that I have. Okay. So I needed to trust enough to compensate for that bar. And that changes for different people. It changes with different situations. So the first thing to keep in mind is that this is trust law number one. Trust is continuous. So when you ask yourself, can I trust this other person? You need to first ask yourself, how much do I need to trust them? I mean, do I need to trust them to help me hide a body if all I need them to do is just submit an assignment to the university on time? That's not the same as helping me hide a body and not telling anybody about it, being my alibi. So there are different levels. And the first question that you have to ask yourself is, if I need to trust someone, if I need to decide whether I can trust someone or not, the first question is, how much do I need to trust them? Because trust is continuous. It's not binary. And the second question is, trust them to do what? Trust law number two, trust is contextual. It's not that your trust in another person is a blank check. You're trusting them with anything. You're going to trust them with one thing. You're not going to trust them with another thing. The question you have to ask is, can I trust them with X? whatever X is. I'm about to board a plane. I'm looking at the pilot. I'm trying to determine, can I trust the pilot? No, that's not what I'm asking, really. Can I trust the pilot to fly this plane, fly through turbulence, know how to handle turbulence if that happens, land the plane with no incident so I get to walk out? That's the context. I don't need to trust them with doing brain surgery. I don't need to trust them with writing a business plan. I don't need to trust them with being a faithful spouse. I need to trust them to fly this plane. So there is a context here. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and that's trust law number 5, trust is transferable. And I'll talk more about that when in the next episode or the next part of this series. But in this case, you may trust someone to do something simply because you trusted them and they proved to be trustworthy doing something else. To me, one example is that I get invited to do workshops on developing strategy. And while I know how to do that, I haven't established myself in that context. But they invite me to do that because they saw me deliver and they experienced firsthand how I delivered a workshop on building trust. And if I delivered and they trust me with building trust, it's transferable to other things. Now, does that mean that they can trust me to fly a plane? They probably don't know that I'm a pilot. And frankly, I can fly certain planes and I'm probably pretty rusty, so I need to get back into it before I can even ask somebody else to trust me with that. But they may trust me with one thing because they trusted me with another. But again, there is a context for it. Trust is contextual. Before I wrap this episode up, a few don'ts. Okay, don't do these. First of all, don't ask, can I trust you? First of all, because what is the value of the answer? If they are trustworthy, what will they say? They will say yes. If they're not trustworthy, what will they say? They will say yes. So, they will not tell you that you can't trust them. So that's the first thing. Don't ask somebody, can I trust you, and expect them to be true, to be real and tell you, no, you can't trust me with that. Now, some people will. I don't want to completely eliminate that possibility. So some people will say, don't trust me with this. Well, it means that you can probably trust them in other areas because they show integrity, and integrity is something that's pretty broad and pretty universal to be trusted in something, but you can't trust them with that specific things. But for the most part, just be careful. If you ask somebody, can I trust you? And they say yes, it could be for two reasons. One is because you can trust them, and the other because they are so untrustworthy that they will not tell you the truth, that you cannot and should not trust them. There is one more thing when you ask someone, can I trust you? And that's how you ask that. Because you can ask that in a way that actually tells them that you don't. This comes back to the, and we'll talk more about that in the third episode in this series, but it comes back to your body language and your tone of voice when you say, can I trust you? I mean, just think about how I said that. I'm going to say it several different ways. Can I trust you? Can I trust you? Did you notice? I mean, this was just tone of voice. And the second one said that I really don't think that I can trust you. And so you sent a message with that question. And in the fourth episode, I'll talk more about the start with trust, the whole component of start with trust. And, you're not starting with trust when you ask that way. And obviously your body language will say it as well. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is what do you do if somebody else preempts you and they say, trust me with that, or you can trust me? Probably, I would say if somebody says trust me, don't trust them, but that's pretty general. It's not necessarily true. It again goes back to the same thing as when you ask them, let's say that without tone of voice or anything or any insinuations that you don't trust them. When you ask, can I trust you? And they give you the answer, same thing. Somebody says, trust me. They can say that for two reasons. Two very opposite reasons. One of them is because you really can trust them. The other is because they're really good actors and they're trying to deceive you to trust them. So in general, I say somebody says, trust me, try and get a sense, but that should not be how you make that decision. In the next two episodes, I'm going to show you how to make that decision, but don't just make that decision because somebody said, trust me. By the way, when you tell someone, I trust you, does that have any value? So when you tell them that I trust you, did you change their level of trustworthiness? First of all, the question is your body language consistent with you trusting them? Because you can say, I trust you, and they can see the hesitation or they can hear the hesitation in your voice. They can see it in your body language. So you may actually say, I trust you, and convey the opposite message, which means that you don't. But if they are really to be trusted and for some reason nothing came across from what you said that would indicate that you don't really trust them, if they are trustworthy, you may not have changed anything. If they're less trustworthy than they believe you trust them, then you may cause that cognitive dissonance that will improve their trustworthiness by a little. And I'll talk more about that in the fourth episode in this series, when I'll talk about that cognitive dissonance and trust before they're trustworthy, or a little before they're trustworthy. So just keep that in mind, that when you say I trust you, you may not have any effect, and you may even have a negative effect. In the next two episodes, what I'll do is I'll talk about how do we trust, how do we make that decision, and I'll separate it into two areas, and those are going to be the next two episodes. One of them is going to be trust them for who they are, and the following one would be trust them for what they do when you interact with them. So the first one is going to be more about things that you know. The second one is going to be about things that you experience firsthand, your firsthand impression. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast, because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you, and can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.